This is section 1.3, weekly time card. On the first question, we have, what is a weekly time card? So a weekly time card is used to compute the total number of hours worked that week. It is a method for recording and tracking the amount of time an employee spends at work. Now remember to turn to page 764 of your textbook and read the example under elapsed time hours. I'm going to explain step by step here too, but just make sure to read it before you continue. So in this question we have, what two things are we supposed to subtract in order to find our elapsed time? So what we need to do is we need to subtract the earlier time from the later time. So let's explain example number 1. We need to find the elapsed time from 6:05 p.m. to 8:51 p.m. Now one thing we need to always check is that the times are in the same either p.m. or a.m. So in this case they're both p.m. times. Now in this example we have 8:51 p.m. and we need to subtract the 6:05 p.m. One thing we always have to check also is that the time here, up here, it is greater than the time that is at the bottom. Okay, so 8 is greater than 6 and 51 it is greater than 0.5. Okay, so if we go to our calculator, we have 8.51 minus 6.05. My result is 2.46. Now in time we have 8:51 p.m., right? When we work in our calculator and when we are subtracting, we need to add a point. So instead of writing 8:51, we're doing 8.51 minus 6.05 equals to 2.46. Okay, so those 2.46 that we got in our result will now be converted to hours, just like we see here at the bottom. It says 2 hours and 46 minutes. So our point here, we can say it's replacing the word hours. Okay, so 2 hours and 46 minutes. Okay, let me write this down. So whatever is before the point are my hours, and whatever is after the point are my minutes. Now if we go to example number 2, we now have find the elapsed time from 10:45 a.m. to 11:36 a.m. Now, as I mentioned before, the time that has to go first is the greater time or the greatest time. Okay, so in this case 11:36 a.m., right? 11 is greater than 10. Now what happens is I cannot subtract 36 from 45, right? So this is where I add another step. Okay, it says here, notice you need to borrow because you can subtract 45 from 36. So when you need to borrow, we add 60 minutes to the minutes and then we subtract the 1 hour. What does that mean? So if I had 11:36 and I need to borrow 60 minutes, right? So to 36 to my minutes, I'm going to add 60 more minutes. If I go to my calculator and I do 60 plus 36, that's equal to 96, right? So now my minutes are 96. However, 1 hour from the 11, I just transfer or convert it to minutes. Therefore, to the hours, I will subtract 1 hour, right? So then I have 11 minus 1, I have 10. Okay, and I just put down the 2 points to make it an hour or a time. So instead of having 11:36, now I have 10 hours and 96 minutes. Now if we come back to what we were doing, right? Instead of having 11:36, now I have 10:96. That is still greater than 10:45. Okay, so now I'll go to my calculator and I do 9.96 minus 10.45 equals to 0.51, which is what we have here. Since we had 0.51, that means that there's no hour. My result is only 51 minutes. So now I go to explain 2, finding elapsed time spent in 1 o'clock. My question is, what do you add to the later time before subtracting if you are subtracting AM and PM, right? So my answer is 12. Remember in the first example, I asked you to check if both times were AM or if both times were PM, right? So now we are going to explain what happens when you have a time AM and another time PM. It says, find the elapsed time from 8:15 AM to 1:30 PM. The first thing we need to do is to add 12 hours to our later time, right? Always, this is going to be the first step when we have an AM and a PM to subtract. So we can go ahead and I have, let me write it here, 8:15 AM and I have 1:30 PM. Now, which one happens first? Of course, the morning, right? And the second thing that happens is at 1:30 PM. That means that 1:30 is my later time. So I am going to add 12 hours to that later time. Okay, so I am going to add 12 hours. Remember to write it like that so it can be better for you, so you can understand where to add exactly. You don't want to add the 12 to the minutes, right? You want to add the 12 to the hours. So 12, 1 plus 12 is 13, and 30 plus 0 is still 30, which is what we have right here, 13 hours and 30 minutes. Now my next step is to subtract the 2 hours, right? So what we did on the previous examples, we have 13:30 minus 8:15. That one we didn't convert it, we didn't change it at all, okay? So if I go to my calculator just to check that the answer is correct, I do 13.30 minus 8.15, right? That is my answer, 5.15. That could also be translated. Let me write my answer right here, 5.15. Again, the number before the point is my hours. The number that is after the point is what represents my minutes. Okay, that is why now I have 5 hours and 15 minutes. So we go to our concept check, and it says find the elapsed time. You can use any strategy of your choice as long as you show what you're thinking or the step-by-step of how did you find your result. Okay, so for problem number 1, we need to find from 4:55, the elapsed time from 4:55 a.m. to 1 p.m. First thing we notice is that we have an a.m. time and a p.m. time. That means that we need to find our later time. So what happened first was the a.m. time. So 4:55 a.m. Now what happened later was the 1 p.m. time. Now I know that my later time would need to have the 12 hours that we need to add, because, right, that happens when we have an AM time and a PM time. We automatically know that we need to add 12 hours. So 12 plus 1 is 13, and 0 plus 0 is still 0, right? So I go ahead, and if I write down 13, right, because the time at the top has to be greater than the time at the bottom, and then I write 4:55. I noticed something. My hours are greater. 13 is greater than 4, right? 13 is greater than 4. However, 0 is not greater than 55. So remember, in our previous example, we borrowed 60 minutes. So if I had 13 hours and I add 60 minutes, okay? In this case, we're adding 60 minutes. How much do I have? Okay, so 0 plus 60 is 60. But I just convert 1 hour of the 13 into minutes. That means that I need to subtract 1 hour to 13. So 13 minus 1 is 12. Now let's see if that works. I write 12 hours and 60 minutes instead of the 13. And I subtract 4 hours and 55 minutes. If we check 12, it's greater than 4. Yes. And 60 is greater than 55. Yes. So I go to my calculator, and I have 12.60 minus 4.55. I have 8.06. 8:05. Okay, 8 hours and 5 minutes. So I just rewrite that here. My answer is now 8 hours and 5 minutes. Now let's go to our problem number 2. In this case, we have from 11:30 p.m. to 7:50 a.m. So first thing we need to do is to find what happens first and what happened later. So what happened first in this case was 11:30 p.m. What happened later was the 7:50 a.m. Okay. Again, since we have an a.m. and a p.m., we already know that we need to add 12 hours to our later time. That means that I need to add 12 hours to 7:50. So now I have 7 plus 12. That is 19. And 50 plus 0 is 50. I come and I rewrite. 1950 is now greater than 11:30. So I write 1950 first. And then I write 11:30. We need to check, is 19 greater than 11? Yes. Is 50 greater than 30? Yes. So we just subtract. We have 19.50 minus 11.30. That is 8.2 or 8.20. 8 hours and 20 minutes. So I rewrite that here, 8 hours and 20 minutes. Now problem number 3, we have elapsed time from 9:45 p.m. to 8 a.m. First step, figure it out what happened first. So my first time is 9:45 p.m. My second time, or my later time, is 8 a.m. We automatically know that we need to add 12 hours to our later time. So 8 plus 12, that is 20 hours. And 0 plus 0, it's still 0. So 20 hours. So now I go ahead and write first the 20 hours, since that's my biggest time. And then I write 9:45. Now, of course, we need to check if 20 is greater than 9, and that is correct. But 0 is not greater than 45. So go ahead and the 20 hours, we need to take 1 hour from it and add this in 60 minutes. Okay. So then I have 0 plus 60 is 60. But then that hour that I just put in minutes, I need to subtract it to my hours. So 20 minus 1 is 19. Now I'll go ahead here and rewrite 1960 minus 9:45. I check again. 19 is still greater than 9, and 60 is not greater than 45. If I go to my calculator, we have 19.60 minus 9.45. That gives me a total of 10.15. 10 hours and 15 minutes. We rewrite that here, 10 hours and 15 minutes. And now our last problem is from 3:30 a.m. to 2:15 p.m. First step, we need to find what happened first. So that is 3:30 a.m. and second 2:15 p.m. We automatically know that we need to add 12 hours to our later time. That means we have 14 hours and 15 minutes, right? 12 plus 2 and then 15 plus 0. That is 14 hours with 15 minutes. Now let's check here. 14 hours and 15 minutes minus 3 hours and 30 minutes. If we check, right, is 14 greater than 3? It is. Is 15 greater than 30? That is not correct. So I need to convert, right, 14 hours and 15 minutes, and I need to borrow the 60 minutes. So instead of having 14, I'm gonna pass one of these hours into minutes, so I'm adding 60 minutes. Okay. And then this 14, 1 hour of the 14 just converted to minutes. Subtracting 1 from the hours. So now I have 14 minus 1, 13. And then I have 60 plus 15, that is 75. Now if I rewrite 14 hours and 15 minutes into 13 hours and 75 minutes, then I subtract 3 hours and 30 minutes. We double check again. 13 is greater than 3. Yes. And then 75 is not greater than 30. That is correct. So I go to my calculator and I have 13.75 minus 3.30. That is a total of 10.45. So 10 hours and 45 minutes. I rewrite that here, 10 hours and 45 minutes. Before we move on to our third concept check, we need to explain the formula that we are going to be using for this section. That is, total hours equals to the sum of daily hours. So now we go to our concept check. On problem number 1, it says, Regina Blanco worked from 8 a.m. to 10:45 a.m. and from 12:30 p.m. to 4:15 p.m. We need to find the total hours worked. So on step number 1, we need to find the time worked between 8 a.m. and 10:45 a.m. Now, first thing we need to check is if both times are a.m.s or p.m.s, or if we have 1 a.m. and 1 p.m. So we have that she worked from 8 a.m. to 10:45 a.m. That means that I do not need to add 12 hours to any of those times. So I have 10:45 a.m. and then I have also 8 a.m. So then I subtract. Go to my calculator and I have 10.45 minus 8. That is a total of 2.45. That is 2.45. Right? Therefore, Regina worked 2 hours and 45 minutes from 8 to 10:45. Now step number 2, it says find the time worked between 12:30 p.m. and 4:15 p.m. Now in this case, we need to ask ourselves if the start time is prior to 1 and if the end time is 1 or later. So our start time is 12:30 p.m. That means that happened prior to 1. And then our end time is 4:15 p.m. That means that it is later than 1 p.m. For that reason, I need to add 12 hours to the end time. Okay, so I need to add 12 hours to the end time. I now have 4:15 p.m. and I'm adding 12 hours. That is 16 hours and 15 minutes. Okay? So if we go and subtract 16 hours and 15 minutes minus 12 hours and 30 minutes, we need to check if we actually can do that. So 16, it is greater than 12, but 15 is not greater than 30. That means that I need to borrow 60 minutes. Okay? So I rewrite 16 hours and 15 minutes. Right? I'm taking 1 hour out of 16 and I'm adding it here as minutes. Right? 1 hour from 16 converts to minutes, and so I need to subtract 1 hour to 16. So 15 plus 60, that is 75. But then 16 minus 1 is 15. So now I have 15 hours with 75 minutes. So then I have 15 hours and 75 minutes minus the start time, which was 12:30. Okay, I go to my calculator and I do 15.75 minus 12.30. That is a total of 3.45. 3.45. Okay, so I rewrite that here. Therefore, Regina worked 3 hours and 45 minutes from 12:30 to 4:15 p.m. Now in step 3, we need to sum up the hours and minutes we found in step 1 and step 2. Okay, so now we have on step 1, we have 2 hours and 45 minutes. And in my step 2, I have 3 hours and 45 minutes. So I'll go to my calculator and I add 2.45 plus 3 5.45. That gives me a total of 5.9. Okay, or 5.90. So I'm gonna write this here. 5.90. So that is the same as saying that we have 5 hours and 90 minutes. Okay? So remember how we borrowed the 60 minutes? We can now do that on the contrary. So those 90 minutes can also be written as 60 plus 30. That means that those 60 minutes that I have here, I can convert it to an hour. Okay, so then instead of having 5 right here, I now have 6 hours. 5 plus 60, those 60 can be converted to an hour, so 5 plus 1 is 6. Have 6 hours, and instead of having 90 minutes, I now only have 30. So my final answer is 6 hours and 30 minutes. Now go to your homework. Look for section 1.3. Complete your homework. Complete problems 3 to the 8 and also number 11.